Today we are talking about the resource die, primarily for D&D, but also for pretty much any action-oriented TTRPG. It's a very simple process, and it's made to help you sort of like track those mundane resources, consumable resources when you're adventuring. Your things like arrows, rations, healer kit charges, things like that, and reduce a little bit more of the sort of box ticking, having to choose between whether you're going to track every single arrow you shot or you're not going to track any ammunition at all. So it kind of is helping to provide sort of a middle range for that. And there's a very important reason for that, and that's because at sort of the D&D and other action RPGs are pretty much set around this framework of resource management. Whether we like that or not, that is sort of the primary premise of the game since it's really inception. There are a number of resources that are finite, and that's supposed to help us as Dungeon Masters add a little bit of pressure to the game, as well as a little bit more of that verisimilitude, whether you think that's a dirty word or not. Away from sort of the collaborative storytelling, it's all about the narrative kind of aspect of it, and then also kind of bridge the gap between, on the other side, having that very hard number crunching, very realistic, it's about rolling dice and odds and probability and mechanics and putting things in your favor. So trying to find a balance sort of in between those two, and I think the resource die does a pretty good job of doing that. Anyways, I'm going to pull you over so you guys can see what I'm seeing, and then we'll go on straightforward with the resource die and what we're talking about. And of course, if you guys have any questions about this, go ahead and throw them in the chat as we're going, and I will address them. Alright, so the resource die, what is it? So it's a very simple framework. It basically allows you to roll a die. If you ever roll a 1 on the die, you reduce the die size. When you roll a 1 on a 1d4, that becomes 1, means you have one singular charge or arrow or day of rations, whatever that unit is. You only have 1 left, and then you use that 1 and you have 0 left. It adds a nice little dice rolling mechanic rather than being like having people just check off boxes as they're using rations while they're exploring the wilderness, or every time that they shoot arrows ticking a box or something like that, or the flip side where nobody's tracking any of that. And it can be helpful. I find it helpful. It adds a little tension. It makes people be like, oh, we should probably go back to town because we're running out of rations, or okay, what do I do if I run out of arrows? It also does some very fun things about balancing missile combat. Look at it this way. If you have a fighter with a longsword that does D8 damage, and you have a fighter with a bow that does a D8 damage, they can both do the same amount of attacks. They can both get pretty much the same bonuses and damage output, but one of them has to stand next to the monster and get hit, have a chance where they can get hit by the monster every turn, and one of them gets to stand across the room not being charged by a monster. That's supposed to be the playoff for if you're safe being a ranged sort of missile user. The payoff is that you have ammunition. There's only a limited amount of times you can do that. It takes the sort of ranged martial character and puts them a little bit closer to what spellcasters have to deal with it by managing spell slots and things like that. So it kind of helps put them in a parallel rather than just having this sort of infinite use weapon they can do, and as they do the thing, they don't lose any resources and they don't put themselves in danger by doing it, which makes them very, very powerful comparatively to the rest of the group. One of the main reasons I left a group I was playing with is because we had a fighter who was only a bow fighter and would stand in the back and let the rogues and the wizards get cut down by bad guys while he stood in the back with his plate armor and a longbow. I didn't want to play with those people because they were okay with that behavior, and I was not, because he was the only fighter in the group. For me, I was like, this is not going to be a group that I'm going to be able to gel with. And there were a lot of other issues. Not like that was the one thing, but that's sort of indicative of the sort of the stuff I was dealing with. And I was like, this is not going to be a good game for me, so I'm going to get out of it. So that's sort of like what the gauntlet looks like as you're sort of pulling people through this. Is that it starts off with the D12, but not everybody gets the D12. So this is basically the max a PC can carry on their back, like on the hoof. Whether that's arrows or rations or whatever it is, that is the quantity of it that they can just carry on their back. So it starts with a D6, and then, you know, how this works is that, let's say the party's adventuring, they go through, they end and they do their camp. I'll have them roll, if they're fresh, they probably all have D6s, have them roll their D6. Let's just pull it up and roll it. I rolled a 2. Good. And it doesn't matter unless you roll a 1. It also brings an abstraction to it. So basically you're going to roll for this any time that you would have used the resources or that resource would be impacted. 1d6 is the number you can carry on your back. As you can see, there are d8s, d10s, and d12s. I use these. This is the reason you want to bring vehicles and beasts of burden on your journey, is because they allow you to carry more resources, which means you can spend more time outside of town before you need to like go back and resupply, which can be really, really useful. A d8. It's usually a horse. Yorse. A horse. Mule. Donkey. It's also what you use for like small boats. So that's things like canoes, rowboats, things of that nature. And then we just move up a little bit. Alright, what seems like the next logical source is basically land vehicles. So basically wagons and carts. And large boats. So that's going to be things that are going to be like small sailing vessels, pretty much. But aren't ships, because that's what a D12 is. If you're looking for some sort of distinction between large boat and ships, one of the useful ones that I found, because there is no sort of really well-defined break between when ship starts and boats stop, because boats are generally considered smaller than ships. But one of the better definitions that I have seen is that ships are for ocean-going sailing, and boats are up to basically in the coastal waters. Sloops or catamarans or things like that, but aren't meant for sort of cross-ocean journeys. Whereas ships can be something that's more like barks and galleons and larger sailing ships like multi-mast, 3-mast standard sailing ships. I like this process because it makes the PCs want to go out and get animals and wagons and boats, because that helps them carry more supplies with them. Now, remember that every time that you do that, and especially when you're using your horses, your mules, and even when you're using your land vehicles that are pulled, like wagons that are pulled by animals, is that you also now have to bring feed for them. The feed gets its resource die just like a player character's rations. Same sort of effect. And so they also need to have that. Plus they need all their tack and their bridle and their gear. And then if you want to get them into barding and armor, like it's also good because this is a good way for the player characters. You can find a way for the player characters to sink money back into the campaign economy, instead of just getting a hoard of gold and not having anything to spend that on. So there's things they're going to have to keep buying again and again and again. So this is going to help you sort of extend that wealth management aspect of D&D through those lower levels, sort of into the mid levels. Now, of course, by the time they're getting up towards like 10th level and things like that, they're going to have so much gold that buying mundane supplies is not going to be much of a concern for them. That's not going to be much of a tax on their gold. But it is something they're still going to have to do, unless they're going to spend high-level slots to make food and water for themselves and their animals all the time. But that is a spell slot that somebody's got to spend every day, or you guys all go hungry, which is not great. So, something to consider. I like healer kit charges. Healer kit charges. I like that one a lot. Because the healer kit comes, I think, with 10 charges. And it's nice to have that be on more of a abstracted thing. Again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and I will address them as I can. Let's say after a scene. After a scene, when you would have spent the resource, or it was otherwise affected. That first part's pretty obvious. Probably understand that pretty easily. If we have a combat encounter and our ranger shoots a bunch of arrows, they need to make a check for that. Afterwards, if they have their quiver, let's say, we've already had a number of combats, and they no longer have a D6, they have a D4 quiver, and they roll to 4, my arrows are fine, and this sort of abstracts both arrows that are in the quiver plus arrows that they could recover from the fight area as well, or what they can scavenge off of bad guys, if they also had bows. So it kind of takes all that abstraction of all these different little activities, and then just kind of folds them all into sort of a singular role, rather than spending a bunch of time being like, okay, go make an investigation check, okay, make some sort of random number check to see how many arrows you pick up, and see if they can work with your bow. Yes, they look like they can work with your bow. Instead, it's just, okay, at the end of the combat, roll your resource die for your arrows. I rolled it, it's fine. Okay, you're able to collect enough arrows and scavenge arrows off the corpses that you don't feel, you're not down to 1 by any means, which would be the next step. So, again, very simple, very much sort of abstracts that, so you can use it and make things just flow a lot easier, while also giving this sort of pinch to be like, hey, remember, this is, every time that you use these arrows, it's a finite resource, and when you use them, you're going to have to roll, and then you can run out of them. And if you're a ranger, and you're a bow ranger, and shooting arrows is your thing, that's not something you want to happen, so you're a little bit more thoughtful about how and when you spend your arrows to shoot. You roll after a scene, when you would have spent the resource, that's very clear, or was otherwise affected by the nature of the scene. It's a good way to start bringing that resource management back in, based off of other things that are going on, not just them using the resource. So the classic example that I usually use is that, okay, the players ford a river, they get across the river, somebody fell in the water, somebody failed their athletics checks or whatever it was to get across the sort of clapper bridge, or however they're getting across the water, and they fell in the water. Okay, when you get to the other side, I need you to make a resource die for your check for your rations to see if any of them got wet or got spoiled or anything like that. So you can also look at it that way to sort of reduce rations and other things. So let's say that they were fording that river, somebody fell in the water, get to the other side, they check their rations. Okay, good, their rations are fine. They didn't get completely soaked or anything. They stay relatively dry, so you should be good. Not a lot of it are ruined. And this helps talk about not just resource, especially with rations, like you eating them, but also bugs getting into them, they just spoiling naturally, they getting wet, all those sorts of things. Bringing into those sort of abstract things. Another good one that I've seen is taking somebody who has arrows or crossbow bolts or something like that, and then they fall down a pit trap, they hit the bottom. Depending on how things go, might have them roll to see if they snap a bunch of arrows when they hit the floor of the pit trap. If I'm feeling, extra mean, or maybe they didn't take a bunch of damage, or I just want them to have that pinch, I'll just call for the roll. It's not an always will thing. It's kind of the nature of how I describe them falling, or what they try to do to sort of like reduce their falling or something like that. It could be as simple as, like, you could have somebody with slippers of spider climb, and they're like, oh, okay, I've got my bow, and I'm gonna run onto the roof. Ceiling. I'm gonna run up the wall and onto the ceiling and start shooting at these guys, and be like, okay, well, I need you to make a resource die check to see if your quiver dumps out arrows when you turn upside down. They're like, oh no, I didn't think about that. Alright, let's do that. So you run up there, D6 of arrows, you roll it. Okay, you're fine. So yeah, this is how the resource die works. So you don't have to be super bashful about calling for rolls on it, because there's still only even down when it gets down to like a D4, that's still only a 25% chance that they're going to fail. And then it's lesser chance the higher we go. So don't feel too bashful about calling for one of these rolls. There's a low likelihood that they're going to fail them. But also keep in mind, especially when you're planning dungeons and things like that, that there are resources that they can find that will allow them to probably recharge some of that ammunition. So have a place where they can find a cache of arrows or something like that, where you can use it and be like, okay, you find enough arrows to actually bump your arrows back up. So that way they can resupply a little bit from those finite things. Because unlike spell slots, which you get back on a rest, you're not going to get arrows back on a rest or rations back on a rest. So that's sort of the basics. So, and everybody's sort of on the same page about what it is and when you roll for it. The only thing I'll add in here is I'm going to add a little writer here. Conserving ammo. So this is actually something that I got from I think I put it away in my Gamma World book, but I think I put it back in the closet. Which is very post-apocalyptic mutant D&D. If you're not familiar with Gamma World, that's fine. It's not important for this. What you can do, though, is like in any good post-apocalyptic setting, you can find weapons, specifically firearms, and they come usually with some amount of ammunition in it. And so, unless you want to run out of ammunition, you can still use the firearm basically in every scene or encounter that you get into, as long as you only fire one shot. If you only fire one shot, that's considered conserving ammunition. And so you don't have to make that resource die roll because your character is taking actions to not use too much of their ammunition of this limited resource. And so I co-opted that for this system. And I was like, that's really cool. It's a really cool thing to make them feel like they have sort of some control over that. It really sucks to be like, well, I only fired one shot and somehow I went from a D6 down to a D4 on my resource die on my crossbow bolts. That doesn't feel great. So the idea with the conserving ammunition is like, if you're only going to fire once, don't worry about it. If you're going to fire twice, you might as well fire every time because you're going to have to make that resource die roll. So shoot all the bullets, all the crossbow bolts, all the arrows you want, all this, all that stuff. Shoot as much as you want because you're going to have to make the roll at the end of the encounter. So if you don't want to make that roll, just shoot once. It's perfectly fine if you guys run into one of those situations where you have a flying creature or the combat starts and you guys are like 120 feet away or something like that. It's perfectly fine to have those fighters and those paladins be like, all right, I guess I shoot my bow. I don't usually use this thing, but I'm going to shoot my bow as I sort of close the distance so I can actually do something on my turn. Then they go into melee after that, and you're like, all right, you guys only shot one arrow. Don't worry about it. You guys don't need to make a roll for that. You guys are able to look around the battlefield after you're done and find one arrow. The other thing that's down here, slings don't get used a lot in D&D. I like slings, and I wanted people to feel like sling gets its fair shake, like there's a reason to take a sling. So one of the easiest ways to do that, the reason you should take a sling, you should pick up a sling. It's super cheap. It's like a silver. Every character should have it as a backup weapon. Throw it in your pack, forget about it. It weighs nothing. It's got free ammunition because you can find rocks pretty much anywhere. So there are very few D&D dungeon delving situations where you're not going to be able to find a rock. A stone of some form. Maybe that's, you know, a broken piece of brick or masonry or stone. Something like that. Maybe it is a river stones, just a rock you pick up off the ground. They're pretty easy to find and resupply. So if you take a sling with you, you're never going to have to buy ammunition. You can find rocks. I assume that as you're walking and you, for some reason, went from a D6 of rocks down to a D4 of rocks, the next time you saw a rock that looked like it would work as a sling bullet, you pick it up and you put it in your pouch. It's a great way, I think, to have people use slings more often, especially as a backup weapon that doesn't really weigh a whole bunch or cost a lot of money, anything like that. So you have conserving ammunition, you have free ammunition, and so it gives you a pretty good overview of how everything kind of works together and how you would use that. Other things that you can use this for, torches or lantern oil, things of that nature. I think I've done this in the game, but I've considered doing it. Repair materials. And by that I mean, especially once we get into this area, like if you have a group and you guys are pulling in and you guys have decided to pull your resources and you're getting animals and you're getting extra vehicles and ships, those things need to be maintained and cared for. Whether that's, you know, the tack and the harnessing, the ship needs, of course, carpentry repairs, sail repairs, all those sorts of things. Land vehicles, same thing. You're going to need axle repairs, wheel repairs, things like that. Anybody who has played the old Oregon Trail video game is very familiar with this. Well, I'm going to need to bring some wagon tongues and some axles and probably some extra some extra wheels. So same sort of thing. You can kind of make a bucket that's just like a gold amount of repair materials that help you anytime that those sort of vehicles or items get damaged, that people with, assuming they have the right tool proficiency, again allows us to use some of those proficiencies that we don't get to use very often in D&D, allows us to sort of take that, and we have a stack of repair materials and be like, okay, I need to make some repairs. The ship, after the last combat we got into that was on the ship. And you're like, all right, well, you're gonna spend a day, and right, there's their own mechanics for like how many hit points you can heal from things like that. And then be like, all right, well, you have, let's say, a D8 of ship supplies. All right, so I did a day's work. Okay, ship supplies look fine. Then it goes down the same resource die. So for the ship can hold up to a D12, and then for every time that it's been sort of like downtime or whatever it is to repair the ship, I just make a roll on that with that resource die, determine whether we need to buy more resources when we get to port or not, basically. Riding supplies, that's not one we talked about, but that would be another good one, too. Using it, say the same sort of fell in the pond or fell in the water or whatever, and it's the wizard this time. The wizard needs to check to make sure, like, their riding supplies is okay, survived it, or is diminished in some way. So let's talk about replenishing. So let's use rations, which I believe are 1 silver a day. I was wrong. I split the difference. It's 5 silver a day. It's half a gold a day. And that's why I have that stuff written down in my DM binder, because I know that's the sort of stuff that I won't remember. Like, what is the cost of rations? So that's why I have that written down. I just didn't pull my thing out. Pull my DM notebook out for this video. Usually I do, but I didn't this time. So it costs 5 silver pieces. So let's say that we got back to town. They have a D4 of rations still left, but they want to go ahead and make a purchase and go ahead and get themselves all the way back up to the D6. So the easy way that I do it is I just take the price, the unit price, which was 5 silver pieces for a day, and then just roll a D6. 1. Okay. So it only takes them 1 unit, so 5 silver pieces, to buy up. There's a sale, and your character's able to haggle for a really good price, something like that. So, very easy. But on the flip side, I could roll a 6. I didn't. I rolled a 4. But if I had rolled a 6, it'd be like 3 gold. It'd be like, oh, that's kind of expensive for rations. And it just kind of gives you this idea that you're never really going to have a 100%. It will always cost 5 silver to replenish this. There's going to be times where, especially in very, very low levels in my games, where you get back to town and you go, okay, I'm going to go buy some arrows, and be like, I cannot pay that much. It's too much for me. I can't resupply here because I don't have enough spending cash. Be like, oh, well, sorry. If you don't have enough money for that, do you have a silver piece? You can buy a sling and you can have free bullets. Yeah, I'll take a sling until I have enough gold to be able to resupply arrows. So it kind of gives them some options and different things to do, and kind of add a little bit more of a free market kind of feel to buying things, especially these sort of mundane things. And you might go, okay, well, I don't want to pay that much for rations because I feel like I can get them cheaper somewhere else, and be like, okay, you will haggle for it next time. Hopefully you don't run out of rations before then. So let's say that you had 0 rations and we wanted to buy all the way back up to that D6. We do the same thing we just did, except we're going to combine all the steps to get there. So the steps are, so if we were going from 0, right here, so we want to get up to a D6, so that's 1 plus 1 D4 plus 1 D6. And then we'll multiply that all by 5 silver pieces. Alright, so we got to buy 1, just right offhand to get us to the 1. Then a D4. Okay, so 3 total. Actually, I can just put this in here. Alright, I can just put a plus 1. There we go. And we can add the D6 to that. It's going to do the math for us. So 4 plus 2 plus 1, 7. Perfect. So 7 times our 5 silver pieces, 35 silver pieces, 3.5 gold. Do the same thing for our arrows. The unintended consequence of this is that in the long term, it does actually make mundane items cost more. There's always the chance they could kind of cost less, but in general, they're going to cost more. Also, these items are so cheap as for adventurers. that as dungeon masters, I don't really care. They're going to have enough money to buy these things. If anything, it's better that these things are more expensive if they're readily available, just to help balance a little bit the wealth mechanics of D&D, which are very much gold heavy in the PC's favor. So there should be, you can consider this maybe a little bit of economic inflation back towards their way. That's a nice way if you want to spin an in-universe way for it, is that there's only a select audience of people who buy this sort of supplies and gear on the regular. It's mostly adventurers and travelers. The market demands between scarcity and its value. So sometimes things are expensive. is the easy way to say that. Sometimes things are just expensive. I don't know who your players are. They might grouse about that, but that's the way I do it. It doesn't take a lot of energy, and most people don't. Most players that I've had experience with don't care one way or the other, because you're talking about such a small amount of money anyways most of the time, that they're like, yeah, whatever. And it's between that and overcharging people for inns, which I think DMs are more likely to do, which is a little weird. Just be like, oh, well, you can stay in this inn for, you can get a cot for 5 gold a night. I was like, a cot for 5 gold a night? That's in the game. I should be getting like attrition style digs for that. I should be getting the nice suite at the hotel, the junior suite at the hotel. I shouldn't be getting a cot in the corner for 5 gold pieces a night. I was right here in my notes that rations were 5 silver a day. I should have read literally 1 line lower. Good to know. So I also want to talk about combining and splitting stacks. I haven't used that nomenclature yet, but a stack is just what I consider this entire track. This is our resource stack. That's just the term I use. There's nothing special about it. But if I say stack, that's what I'm referring to. So if we're going to combine and split stacks. So you can have everybody only use 1 resource die for any shared resources. So if you want to put a big bucket has everybody's arrows in it, and a big bucket that has everybody's rations in it, then you can do that. And do that, just remember that any resupply you're going to do needs to be multiplied by the number of people that you're accounting for to be using those supplies. The number of characters that are using that supply stack. If you do use individual supplies, there is a thing where you can combine and split stacks with other characters. So let's say we have an example where we have our fighter and we have our ranger. The ranger has been blowing through arrows, and now they are down to 1 arrow. They're like, oh, I'm down to 1 arrow, and I am a bow-heavy character, so I really need arrows to kind of do my thing. And the fighter's like, well, I have my full D6 quiver because I mostly use like a greatsword or something, so I haven't used a lot of them. Can I give the ranger some of my arrows? The answer to that is yeah. You just look at the track and be like, okay, so you have a 1d6, and you want to reduce. You're going to reduce to 1d4. And our ranger who has 1 is going to go up a step on the stack, and we'll have 1d4. So you split your stack and share it, and you guys now both have 1d4 arrows. Of course, the more pertinent thing to do would be to actually probably just swap and just let the fighter have 1 arrow and let the ranger have the full d6. Because again, it's more optimal play is to combine as many stacks as you can. So the higher the die, the better. And so you could be like, okay, the fighter could be like, you know what, I'm just going to give you all my arrows. And I just won't have any. So I'll go down the stack. And they go, okay. So that was 1. Then you're going to give me... So if he has a 1d6, he basically has a 3 stack, right? He has a 1, a 1d4, and a 1d6. Alright. So if I add that to my 1, so that would be the 1. That would be the 1d4. And that would be the 1d6, and be like, oh, actually, I can't carry that many arrows, so you should probably keep at least the 1 arrow. Now, if they had a mule with them, they'd be like, yeah, absolutely, and I'll take them, and then I'll have it on my mule, and I'll take that extra, I'll split that stack back down and put that 1 arrow on the mule, and then I can have 1d6, and then if I go down to a d4, I can go back over to the mule, get that 1 back out, and now I'm back to a d6 if I need to. So that's an easy way to do that. But if you want to take everybody's rations, like I said, and do it as a group, and then be like, all right, we're going to put all our rations in the wagon. This is the point you go, all right, just remember, you don't want anything to happen to that wagon or you're all out of food. So keep that in mind. If you guys are putting everything all together in one bucket, don't lose the bucket. So you need to make sure that the wagon doesn't get stolen. You want to make sure that the wagon doesn't break down somewhere, or you're not going to be able to carry all your stuff. Nothing happens to it, like I said, it goes into a river or a pond or something like that, or it gets damaged in some way and you lose rations that way. Right, now this becomes a valuable thing that we need to protect. That can be really good, especially for sort of a traveling adventure, and then you can give motivation to your monsters that's not kill the party. The example that I usually use is a raiding patrol of goblins attack the camp, like while they're camped or something like that. And they're not really focused on killing the player characters. They're focused on grabbing as much, anything valuable that they can find, and running off into the night with it. So that kind of shifts their priorities as to what they're trying to do in the encounter, and it may shift your players' sort of actions about how they respond. And they're like, yeah, none of the goblins are coming to attack you guys. You guys are just waking up as you see these goblins sort of like carrying off boxes and crates and barrels and stuff into the night. They're like more concerned less with killing the goblins than making them drop their things. And trying to do some damage control where they're not losing rations or feed or bolts or any other, like money, if they keep money in the wagon, that sort of stuff. So looking at it from that aspect too, just kind of give them more things to worry about and broaden the context for things that are like combat encounters that are not just monster kill PC, PC kill monster. So now there's other things going on, and people have this sort of asymmetric combat encounter. There's this sort of, but they're not necessarily going at each other directly like you would be in like, I'm going to kill you, you're going to kill me. They're more like tangentially opposed. Like, I'm trying to get the supplies. Well, I don't want you to have the supplies. So now this is more like a competition towards the same thing rather than just a straight up sort of murder fest. And again, the goblins, in that example, the goblins are there for the supplies. Their morale's going to be really low. The supplies aren't worth anything to them if they're dead, so they're going to prioritize their own life. So if it becomes, okay, this target, these people are way too hard of a target, they're going to be way too hard to steal from, they'll run off. But you still, you know, maybe screwed up their long rest, so they're going to need to rest longer. They may have gotten away with some of the supplies. You can do those resource checks. Sort of provide this context as like, okay, you know, it is dangerous to camp, but maybe not. It doesn't feel as random as a lot of random encounters can feel, where it's just like, oh, goblins show up and try to kill you. No, this is, people are trying to steal from you and woke you up while they were doing it. Or maybe they don't. You know, depending on who's on watch and if somebody falls asleep, maybe sometimes you just wake up in the morning and you're like, yeah, you guys got robbed. Or a wild animal got into your supplies or something like that. If you guys will make a resource die check for me, and let's see. So that's combining and splitting stacks. It's very, very simple. So this also works like, say, if like our ship example, if you have a full D12 of supplies, let's say of rations on the ship. Once you get off the ship, once you disembark and you're going to go on your foot, you can only carry the D6 in your backpack. So you have to split that. You have to split off that piece of the resource. So you go, okay, so a D12, okay, that would be 1 for us on our back, that's going to be 1D4 on our back, and then that's 1D6 if we take the max in our backpack. So then there's a D6 of my rations on the ship for later that I can resupply out of, but there's also a D6 on my back as I set off from the ship into the city or into the jungle or whatever we're going to explore. Gives you this extra little crunchy bit of resource managed, kind of tactical kind of element to, especially if you're doing something that's like a hex exploration kind of game, or some sort of game that's going to, that you want to put more emphasis on sort of managing those resources, so that way you can have that tension and that balance that's inherent to having those things in the game as they are intended, instead of doing sort of the, oh, you don't need to track arrows, or you don't need to track rations, or blah blah blah. By not tracking those things, we actually push down on aspects of the game where, okay, well, now there's no point for me to have taken sort of like the Outlander background, or where I can help do that, or now my ranger feels less useful because I can't forage very well, or if you have played the lizard folk, they can sort of make their own things and they can craft ammunition and things like that. That downplays all that stuff. We have characters that have toolkit proficiencies that they can use these resources to make things. They have the ability to have those spells, to make those spells that allow us to sort of purify food and drink, or maybe give us advantage on when we make that resource die check. So if we were to say, okay, I'm only down to, maybe we were tracking all the rations together as a group. Alright, we only have a D4 of rations left on our ocean-going voyage, so it's kind of hard to resupply. We're in the middle of the ocean. We don't run out of supplies. That would be very bad for us. Like, okay, the cleric's going to cast Purify Food and Drink. So that's going to allow us to, it's going to retard some of the sort of natural spoilage, and so it's going to help us make the rations go a little bit further. And so I'm going to let you guys roll the D4 for the resource die with advantage. So we'll take that. Didn't matter. Rolled 4s on both. So we're going to take that. Don't need to worry about it. But then that helps, makes it less likely that we're going to run out of rations, and that spell feels like a very viable spell to take for something like that. Like having something that's going to give you feast, that's going to actually give you magical food, good berries, things of that nature. Those spells are now a lot more important. And most people look at good berry and they're like, oh, it's a great way to get like 1 hit point. Get like a small number of hit points back at low levels. But like actually the more powerful thing about good berry is that it gives you a full day's worth of food very easily for probably the entire party. It's very critical if you guys sort of run out of supplies at any point. Oh, I should do the rough calculations. Okay, so here's the rough calculations if you wanted to know sort of how many charges you're going to get out of this. So for a D12, you're going to get roughly 20. And for our D12, you're going to get roughly 14. And when it comes to your D8, that is about 9 checks. And for D6, that's about 5. It's about 2. So yeah, that kind of gives you an idea of why it's so much more helpful to have those higher dice sizes, because you're gonna run through so many more checks before you're gonna roll a 1 and reduce the size. So right, with the D6, it'll probably, with 5 on something like rations, that's probably gonna get you through the adventure. If you're doing some dungeon delving, that's gonna get you through 5-ish days of dungeon crawling. And so if you look at it, the full stack, if you're like 8, that's going to get you through about a week's worth. Depending on how often you call for it. Now, one of the things that I do with my exploration, which we haven't seen yet in the solo RPG, though we do use the resource die, so anybody who's watched the solo RPG should be very familiar with this framework, or the idea of seeing it in action. As we're doing in the solo RPG with Leah, you see that every day I'm checking for the resource die, doing all that stuff as we travel. Sure, in those low levels, you can only have as many arrows as you have in a quiver, but once you have access to something like a bag of holding or a quiver of the endless, if you really want to get the magic item that means you don't have to worry about having ammunition, then it feels like something that is an investment for you if it improves the way that you play the game, both in character and out of character. That really feels good. If you have a character or a player who's just doesn't really like the resource mechanic, even though they're using it, and be like, all right, well, there's a way that you could get, it can be like a little side quest or something. All right, there is a way that you get a quiver that never runs out of arrows, and then that can be its own sort of like little side adventure, dungeon delve, or something like that, or maybe it's negotiation, or maybe they steal it, or however they want to get their hands on it, and whatever adventure you want to make. But gives them an opportunity to be like, okay, if you want to go do this thing, you can go do this thing. Usually for something like side quests and things like that, I'm not going to give you a level up for it. I'm not going to track sort of like your XP as far as leveling up the characters, because you are actively going for a very specific reward for a character. And it's not really furthering the actual narrative of the game. This is like its own side thing. You are doing the side content, side quest specifically kind of to get this one really nice item that's worth a lot of money. So that's the reward for going on the side quest. Plus, I mean, you're going to get some other treasure too, but I'm not going to award you a level for doing a side quest. Alright, so what else can you use this for? But there are some alternative uses that kind of use the same system, so I kind of want to talk about those a little bit. The other one, the alternative ones, is durability. So if somebody has a specific type of tool or piece of gear that they use pretty often, and you want to be like, okay, they're doing an application or something like that, and I want there to be a sense of tension, a sense of potential that they could lose this thing. So sometimes I might be like, okay, well, let's roll a durability test. You're using, let's say, your thieves tools, and I want to see like how good your thieves tools are doing, because you've been unlocking a lot of locks and disarming traps and that sort of stuff, and be like, okay, I feel like thieves tools in general are delicate instruments, and so I think that they should only have a durability of, say, a D4. Okay, you're working on this lock, and I might do this as a failure, so there's a consequence for failure. Consequences like, oh, there's a locked door, and I failed at picking the lock. And we get into that weird space where it's like, okay, what stops me from just trying to pick it again? Or, especially if there's not a trap on it. I shouldn't call for the roll if they're going to have unlimited attempts to open the chest. Given enough time, they're going to figure out how to get the chest open. But then that doesn't make the rogue player feel great, because they're like, look, that's my thing, is unlock things. This is why I might bring a durability test and be like, okay, well, you failed to unlock the chest. Let's see, did you damage any of your tools while you're doing that? So let's roll a d4. No. Okay, so your tools look, I mean, they're a little bendy, but you can always kind of bend them back into shape. They're delicate, but they're not like made of crystal or anything like that. They're not super breakable. And then it kind of gives you that sort of almost Skyrim kind of feel, where you have lockpicks and you can break them down, and then be like, oh, well, you know, I roll a 1 and I'm down to like finite supplies, and if I have a 1 on my thieves tool, and I'm like, ooh, well, if I fail to unlock a lock again, then I'm probably going to end up breaking these tools, and then we're going to be out of thieves tools. So we need to make sure, buff me, give me every bonus possible to unlock the next thing that you guys want me to unlock, team, or we're not going to be able to unlock stuff, and we're going to have to rely on the barbarian using his lockpick, which is an axe. So if we don't want to damage anything inside any of these chests, and we want to make sure that I'm capable of disarming traps in the future, you guys need to help me out here. So that they can give you that, and then there's camaraderie, right? People come forward with guidance or enhance ability and all sorts of things, or do the aid action. They kind of give you all these bonuses as possible to try to get you to take care of things, and then it feels like everybody's involved with unlocking the chest, which feels really good. That everybody sort of is able to bring their sort of thing to it, and you guys get to all share, and like, hey, I helped. I am also part of the thing, and it wasn't just a, we sit back and let the rogue do his thing. A thieves tool is probably like a d4, like it's a pretty delicate, okay, see, just rolled the 1. So, that would be bad for us. Now, this is also the great part where if you had the wizard that has like the mending spell or something like that, can step forward and use mending on it and be like, oh, I was able to fix your thieves tools or things like that. Bringing us to these options where we can actually make use of all those cool utility spells that are in D&D that don't get a lot of fanfare, right? We don't get... How often do you really see mending pulled out in a campaign? Mending is very, very specific, and if you're not doing anything that sort of damages mundane gear, then mending's never going to be a useful spell for anybody to have in your campaign. But this does provide those things to do, like enhance ability, to do all those extra things, like haste, things like that, because I think haste also gives you advantage on dexterity ability checks, not just saves. I think it does saves, but I think also dexterity ability checks. Also, we can use this for all sorts of items. So if we used a crowbar, for example, a crowbar probably doesn't have a D4 when it comes to durability. I'd say it probably has more like a D10. I mean, it's a piece of iron, right? Yeah, crowbar's fine. Your crowbar's fine. Your crowbar does the crowbar thing. And then sometimes on some of these, maybe it doesn't make sense to reduce it. Like the Thieves Tools has a bunch of tools in it, so it kind of makes sense to reduce it. Same thing if you wanted to be like, you have a character that's got a side hustle. Maybe they're an elf, so they have an extra 4 hours in the day where they're doing like, using their wood carving tools or something to do a little side hustle to make like a little money on the side or something like that. So when they show up to town, they have their carved little figurines that they try to sell off to people. Be like, all right, well, I think you can roll a d6 for your wood carver's tools, and every time that you use them, because if not, they're going to get blunt, and you're going to need to get them sharpened. Do you actually have a whetstone? The answer is probably no, mechanically, and the whetstone doesn't do anything. But what if the whetstone did do something? What if it did allow you to take care of this thing? What if the whetstone itself was the resource? Now you're thinking. Now you're like, okay, well now you have a D6 worth of whetstones, because you typically have more than one whetstone, depending on the type of blade and the grain and what you're trying to do with it. So you could have like a blade care kit, kind of, with oils and all sorts of stuff in it. So you could have that, and that could be the resource, and be like, okay, well you need to resharpen your tools after you use them. Okay, I resharpened my tools. Alright, your whetstones and everything look fine. No need to worry about it. And then you can run back into town and be like, alright, I need to buy some more whetstones. And again, another sort of outflow to get the player character's money back into the economy of D&D and out of their pockets. Get them stuff to spend money on. Sure, it's a little bit at a time, but it also kind of gives them the feeling like they're doing stuff, and as they're creating stuff, you know, there is a cost that comes with that. And if they're selling their wooden figurines, they're going to make plenty of money. They're not going to worry about the whetstone tax of that. That's the sort of the big thing as far as durability, so that's a good thing to do. But you can also use it for breaking if you wanted to. Like, say, if you wanted to do a rope, and let's say a rope has a durability of a D8. We rolled a 1 with our 50-foot rope and be like, okay, as you guys sort of coil the rope back up after you have climbed out of the hole that you were down exploring, and you realize that this rope is super frayed, and you think that the next time you use it, if you use it again, there's a good chance it'll snap when you guys put weight on it. So it's time to probably buy a new rope. So you may just want to toss this one away. So you can push it all the way to be like, okay, there's not really... A rope is a singular item. It's not like a resupply kind of thing, like a toolkit is, or whetstones or something like that. This is like, we rolled a 1, it's not any good. Or you can make it super tense and be like, hey, oh, by the way, while you guys are climbing down the rope, why don't you go ahead and give me that D8 roll to see how the rope's looking? Be like, oh, I hope we don't roll a 1. Ooh, whew, we didn't. So the rope, you hear the rope creak, but it does not snap. It does the normal rope creaking as you put a bunch of weight on it and stretch it out, but it doesn't snap while you guys are climbing down it, which is good. And so you can add a little bit of tension that way by being like, oh, because you guys didn't check the rope before you went down. Now you know that's a thing you should probably do to make sure that the rope looks okay before you put a whole bunch of weight on it and you're trusting it to keep you from falling down a 50-foot chasm or whatever. So that's durability. It's all very super easy. And then the other thing that I want to talk about is timers. So the countdown timers, if you are familiar with Blades in the Dark and how it uses clocks, it's kind of a similar aspect, except it uses this resource die mechanic again. When I start up a new campaign, I get all the player characters like backstories in. I'll make a countdown timer for some element of their backstory. Zarka, that's the character I just played yesterday in the one shot. Let's say I'm gonna put her on the 1d4. Zarka is a bard, and she has a classic sort of face infiltration honeypot kind of background. That was sort of her background. So having the 1d4 is at the end of each session, I'm gonna roll that 1d4. If I ever roll a 1, it goes down to a 1, and that means like after the next session, this scorned lover is going to appear when at the most available opportunity. They're going to show up. So it might be once they get back into town from an adventure, or it could be somebody they come across on the road, and usually it's just going to be some sort of scene. There's going to be some slaps, there's probably going to be some tears, there's probably going to be, you know, some yelling, things of that nature. Who knows? If the scorned lover has guards on them, maybe they get into some sort of altercation, maybe they try to take Zarka away, try to kidnap Zarka, because this person's still in love with them, or wants them to do whatever they're going to do to them, and that's something the group's going to have to deal with. So that's a fun thing to kind of throw in there, and that's a personal backstory that can just sort of like work into the ongoing narrative. And so I come up with that, and I just come up with one of those for every player character that's in the game. So let's say, actually these two characters are in the same universe, which is a little weird. And then usually I'll just move them up a little bit. Move them up that stack. So, because I don't want to get into a situation where I run into where everybody's countdown timers all hit at the same time. It's like, oh, in the next session I have to introduce these 4 NPCs who are all going to come at the different player characters for different things. So I want to spread it out so it feels natural. So I usually kind of like move them up the stack. What would be Foxhole? And let's say his I'm gonna just call them the were kids. They're kids that are afflicted with lycanthropy. And show up asking his help for, let's go for, and again, I don't need to figure this out right now. As soon as we get closer to it, I'll have a better idea of sort of what would make sense in the game. It's like, okay, well, we know the were kids from his backstory, or what he's done previously. At some point down the line, one of the were kids is going to show up and ask, like, hey, we need your help with this thing. Can you come help us, please? So sort of built-in backstory side quest, very easy, kind of depending on where we are in the campaign. Then I make the decision as we get closer to, I'd fill in the blanks for this these question marks. I'd be like, okay, so what do they actually want? What are they actually looking for? What is the actual thing they're dealing with? And if possible, try to link that into sort of the ongoing major plot thread, or at least an upcoming thing, or maybe a past thing. Make it more cohesive, not make it just feel like this weird tangent thing that happens that we're going to go address. No, that is more combined with what's kind of going on in general. So we reach the end of the session, and I go, alright, now that the session's over, let's see Zarka. Okay, Zarka's fine, we don't make any progress there. And Foxlove is fine. Okay. So nothing changes there, and I just roll that after every session as they go down. And for this one, I'll even go up to 1d20. So I would keep filling these up. So the d4 slot, the d6, there's a 1 slot, the d4 slot, the 1d6 slot, and just kind of keep moving things up the stack. Except I would go all the way to 1d20. And then that would just be sort of the cube where everything else just kind of holds. If I'm like, oh, well, this thing could come back again and be important in the campaign, so I'll put it here, and it's sort of our cue for things that kind of move down into the stack. And then I just roll a d20 for all of them, and it's unlikely that those are going to make any move until something drops into one of the previous stacks. Now, once we get sort of the stacks full up and we start moving things out, I'll start to sort of move things down the stack as possible. But I try not to have like a whole bunch of things on d6 or a whole bunch of things on d4. I try to keep it only like one per sort of frame there, so that way it's not super confusing, and then just keep a bunch of things in the back queue. Because like I said, I don't want to get in a situation where it feels like a lot of things hit all at the same time. Everything feels super scattered. So it feels more organic. It's like, hey, then this person shows up, and then, hey, we go back to doing our normal thing. Then this person shows up, and we go back to doing our normal thing. And then this person attacks us, and we go back to our normal thing. So it feels more natural, like there's more of a cadence to it, not like, we did our normal thing, and then boom, 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 a bunch of backstory stuff happened. Then we go back adventuring again. So that way it feels a little bit more folded in. It's a little bit more integrated. It has a cadence to it. Let me put it that way. Is that it has a natural kind of rhythm that makes it feel appropriate. Doesn't make it feel super weird. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much everything for countdown timers. It's a very simple topic. There's not too much that's going on with it. Yeah, at the end of each session, you will roll the die. When it ticks down to 0, you know that thing will show up at the soonest available time, preferably the next session. These are for my own notes about it. Even if you have to jump some hurdles to make it happen, one of the PCs has a brother, but they're in the middle of a dungeon crawl. Guess who the party finds tied up in the next session? Or whatever they have to say is so important to their brother that they chase them into the dungeon to find them, to ask them about it. And then maybe you play it off like the brother doesn't really know anything about adventuring, doesn't understand that this is a really, really dangerous cave. And the only reason they were able to get to the PCs is because the PCs have sort of carved a path through the dungeon. And now they have this NPC that's stuck with them, who's like a non-combatant that they also need to protect. Just to add a little bit more twist to the dungeon, to make the dungeon just a little bit harder, and the adventure just a little bit more difficult, because now they need to protect this brother who is a little, seems like maybe a little absent-minded, or is maybe just was so determined to care about the danger that they were going to have to put themselves in to do it. So you can frame it that way. Very interesting. But then it gives them something else to sort of focus on while they're in the dungeon. So now it's not just about, you know, getting treasure and slaying monsters and accomplishing whatever their mission is, if it's not just get treasure. But they also need to protect this NPC who's not a combatant, who is very, very squishy, doesn't wear any armor, probably doesn't really have any weapons, maybe has a dagger on them, something like that. Oh, alternatively, you could drop a clue, like one of the goblins the party is sneaking up on has an ornate dagger. It is in his pommel is your PC's house crest. You remember growing up, your father gifted a suspiciously similar dirk to your older brother on his birthday. Backstory side quest unlocked. Right, having something like that is like, it doesn't necessarily have to be a person. I was just using people as an example. But you can find items, notes, anything like that, and reference to them, maybe, and notes that the bad guys have, things like that, orders, those sorts of similar things. We just need to make most of this stuff for the countdown timers. We really only need to kind of make a crumb of adventure. We need to basically have that room, have that adventure seed, and if we float it out there, and assumably, if the person took the time, your player took the time to make the backstory and have that person in it, they're gonna jump on that hook, that adventure hook, like a hungry fish, and just go to town on it. And so then that's gonna shift how the campaign goes for a little bit, and then you can do the side quest thing, which can be really nice while you're planning out your next dungeon or trying to figure out what maybe the next sort of like bigger narrative, overarching plot of the area is going to be. As you're building up that stuff, then you can go be like, oh, you guys go off and do this side adventure, and that's one of the things that I think is really useful to pull out one of those published short adventure modules, something that's somewhere between like maybe 1 to 4 sessions of play, something that's pretty simple. It can be a dungeon delve, or it might be sort of like its own little hex thing, or maybe it's you know, a 7 Samurai thing, protecting the village against a raid, against some monsters, or something of that nature. Something very simple that doesn't really take a lot of creative. You don't have to wring a lot of creative juice out to sort of make that happen. While you can save some of that Dungeon Master Game Master juice, creative juice, and pour it back into the next thing that you're worried about running after they finish this up. So it can kind of give you a bit of time to do a little bit more prep than maybe sometimes you have in that sort of week-to-week prep cycle if you're running a weekly game, where you may not have as much time to prep. For the resource durability, be judicious about the use. Running out of some of those items is not fun in a dungeon. So if you have the thief that runs out of thieves' tools, or you run out of rope in a vertical dungeon where that's going to impede their progress in a very meaningful way, it's very hard to repel without a rope. So sure, you might have the wizard's like, I got this, I got Featherfall, let's all just jump down into this hole. And everybody jumps down in the hole, and as they're floating down, they'll be like, yeah, but how do we get out again? I don't know. You guys slowly fall down the hole and land at the bottom. And then you gotta figure out a way to get up, and doing free climbing checks is not... Most characters are not very good at that. You can make one of the treasures some rope, and they can find some rope to replace their rope. Be like, oh good, we found a rope, now we can finally get out of there. Which is good. For mundane treasure, it has a really good feeling in the game when you're like, God, we went down this chasm to get into this underground cavern area, and we don't have rope to get back out. And that's just always in the back of their head as they're sort of like exploring things, like, well, maybe we'll find another exit out that doesn't require us to climb out. And then they find some mundane gear, they find some rope as loot off of a fight, or they find a room that has old mining supplies in it or something, and be like, and you find, you know, one good rope in there, and they go, oh, finally, at least we can get out of this place. Good, we got the rope. Everybody's happy that we got rope. And you're like, that's a great feeling, sort of as Dungeon Master, be like, I have given you this basic piece of equipment, and you are so happy to get that you found the specific thing that you need, even though it's not of great monetary value in this specific situation. It is the most valuable treasure we're going to find, because it allows us to get the heck out of here. It really sucks to be the rogue, and very early on in the dungeon, just through sheer bad rolls or something, you lose basically your entire thieves kit. You're like, well, I am pretty much useless for the rest of this dungeon. I can't really do the rogue thing that I'm supposed to do, that is sort of like my class focus. So that can be really frustrating as a player when like I can't do the thing that I built a character who's geared to do. It's supposed to be like my limelight moment, and now because of this, because of the resource die, it's taken that away from me. Rather than add tension, it's actually just removed this thing completely, and now we have to worry about the barbarian breaking down every door and triggering every trap and busting open every chest, maybe screwing up some of the loot in the process. Intermediate to advanced DM/GM kind of topic to try to figure out. I feel like if once you run enough games and you start feeling about it, you'll kind of get the feeling and be like, yes, they can handle this. Yes, this will add tension, but if it fails, it's not going to completely derail the adventure that I have in mind. Or if it is going to derail it, and I do think that they might fail, but it's so close to the end that they're not going to be going like most of the game, not being able to do the thing they're supposed to be able to do well. So, but now we've got that tension at the end of it, like, oh, now there's one big trap, and the thieves out of thieves' tools, and the wizard doesn't have mending, and we can't fix the tools, so we're just going to have to brute force through this trap. Maybe it's a nice little, like, trap gauntlet kind of hallway or something like that at the end, which would be lots of fun action movie, adventure movie kind of thing, where there's, like, blow darts, and swinging pendulums, and flying blades, and spikes that go up and down, and all sorts of crazy, wonky, stupid trap stuff. And be like, oh, this is the one where we really needed the rogue to have their thieves' tools, and their thieves' tools just broke in the last door. Dang, we're just going to have to run through it and do our best. That's not necessarily, doesn't feel necessarily like a down moment for our rogue characters. They're like, well, I mean, I don't know if I could have been able to disable that entire trap anyways. There's so much going on to it, and now it's this cool gauntlet skill challenge thing that we're all going to run through and try to hop over the spikes and duck under the poison darts and twist around the swinging pendulums and all that fun, classic, adventure-y trap stuff. So, word of warning about the timers. As I said, timers are typically adventure seeds, and the consequences of poor decisions rearing their heads back. So, one of the ones that I use as an example is I was playing a duet game, so there's only one player character and I was running for them, and they came up with a solution to a problem that 100% creative solution just basically nipped in the bud right there. Collapsible rod that they used as like a shower curtain tension rod and they hung a blanket over the doorway, and the creatures are so stupid that I was like, and they didn't have hands. I'm like, there's no way they're gonna figure out how to get out of this room. They're dumber than sheep, and sheep you can cordon off with sheets. That is the plan. And they go, great, mission accomplished. Going back to town, telling them, hey, you remember that Vargweel threat? Don't worry, I took care of it. It was super easy. Not even worried about it. I'm kind of a pro-adventurer. And I was like, alright, this is the thing that I'm going to add to the countdown timer. And I think I started at like a D8. I'd probably say like the blanket stops locking the entrance to the wheel. I believe that's how you spell it. Vargweel, I think. Den. So now it's just a 1d8. Be like, look, eventually that blanket's gonna fall down. Gravity's gonna do its thing. You probably didn't perfectly balance it. Actually, I know you didn't perfectly balance it. I was there. So, because you need to cover the entire doorway. So, in an amount of time, I'm going to run down that countdown after every session we play. Once I hit 0, guess who comes back? Because it wasn't really a permanent solution. And because they're weird magical monsters, you're like, well, they don't really starve, as far as I could tell. Or they would get hungry enough that they would eventually figure out how to get out. So it's one of those combinations, like, because you didn't really deal with this threat, like, I consider that book ended and the mission was closed and they got their level up from it. But I was like, but it's not really done. Like, there's going to be a different threat, but that would be a very different adventure seed. So now it's, if we were following this, you know, in, what is that, 14, 15, 16, 17, about 17, 18 sessions, something like that. So a good long while, you're going to start hearing the rumors come back. And you can do that every time that there's you drop the die on this countdown is you can be like, oh, here's a piece of information you got. Just a weird offhand comment that somebody makes or something, some sort of weird little clue you can kind of sprinkle in. People have gone missing around whatever that area was again. If my player was smart, they remembered that was the first thing that they found out, how they found out about that threat initially, is that people were gone missing, and then later on bodies were found without any heads on them, in these sort of grisly, like out in the middle of nowhere. Or sometimes, occasionally, as they got more familiar and the Fitzhywel threat got more and more present, they would just find people dead in their homes without any head. Because that's how the Fitzhywel operates. It'd be like, they're freaking out because they're finding all these headless corpses everywhere. And they've got these monsters attacking them in the night. And maybe you start hearing things about like that character and be like, and this adventurer is a liar who took our money because they said that they had dealt with the threat, but the threat's back. They did not deal with the threat. And it's like, so now you have some renown, but it's more like infamy. Now you've got kind of a bad reputation because you took money, you told these people the threat was done with, and now they see that that threat is still persisting. And then it's up to the player and the player character to try to figure out, does your player character feel motivated to go like make things right for that? Because I mean, they've leveled up multiple times at this point. It'd be like, so it's like a first or second level adventure. That's kind of what it's geared for. If you're coming back as like a 5th level character or higher than that, it's like, this is not going to be like a real big threat for you. Like, you're going to come in here and it'll be a nice little power fantasy where you come back, just like in a video game, where you come back to an area that you fought in before. And now you've leveled up so much, and now you're just, I'm cleaving through all these low-level enemies, things that I used to really struggle with, and now just take one hit, instant crits on them, killing everything left and right. And that's a very fun way. To have them sort of revisit those old areas, clear their own name, deal with the threat completely, and also show their own level up, and you know, get some of their good name back and things like that. If you want to make reputation management an aspect of your game, which I suggest that you do, so that way there are consequences for the player's actions. So if your player characters go around screwing over people, then they build a reputation for screwing people over, and then people don't want to work with them. People don't want to sell them stuff. People don't want to give them jobs. They don't want to help them on their own adventures because they have this reputation for just screwing over everybody that kind of interacts with them. But sometimes that can help curb some murder hobo sort of tendencies to be like, hey, there are consequences to your actions. You guys stand out a lot. It's very easy to identify that you are the people who you are. So rumors about you spread very easily. So obviously I use this framework, this resource die framework, a lot for hex crawls, whether I'm running them. I really like the arrows one a lot, and the reason this entire topic came up is that I've spent the last couple of weeks kind of talking with multiple groups I'm playing with, as well as I've saw people mention it online, and other sort of content creators kind of start to talk about it. I was like, this is a good topic, and I've been doing it for a long time, and I have my own framework, and I was just introducing it to my other games and some of my other D&D things, the way that I sort of run things or approach them. And this is one that everybody kind of seemed to like. They kind of like the resource die. I've enjoyed it ever since I sort of stumbled across it. Like I said, Seth Skorkowski just did a video about it, and he referenced like a 2021 blog talking about resource die mechanics. I'm like, 2021? I was doing this like in 2015, I think. Like, I've been doing this for a long time. And I was like, it's definitely older than whatever he was referencing as it. But I was like, I don't even remember where I found it. But I do really like this as sort of a way to make that resource management aspect a more potent part of the game, because it's supposed to be a part of the game. Like, it's baked into the rules, so we really should be using some sort of resource management for these mundane things. Like I said, it helps balance out ranged martials, kind of makes things a little bit more cohesive. It makes low-level adventuring a lot more tense in a very easy way when you have to do things like track rations. Do I really want to spend the time to do Goodberry? Do I want that to take up a slot of magic if in one of my spells that I have learned or memorized? Or do we just want to buy rations? Like, that's a pretty easy thing to do. And I can save you know, what I was going to use for that for another entangle or ensnaring shot or whatever. Everybody that kind of have shown it to seems really interested in it and really likes using it. Because also one of the things I look for in these sorts of designs is rolling dice, because rolling dice is fun. It's the same thing that makes having advantage or disadvantage more fun than just having a static number, is being able to roll the dice and adding the sort of like risk element to it, kind of gambling kind of things, and then being able to be like, well, you can do things to give yourself advantage or disadvantage on these rolls. Very, very fun thing to sort of add in, so they feel like they can do things, and then it allows them to use those spells, like the mending spells, the purify food and drink, those sorts of things that don't often get used in a lot of D&D games. You can use this as a way to sort of funnel more of those utility spells into that. And there's a good reason now to be like, well, I think I'm going to prepare purify food and drink because I know we're running low on rations, so if I have a spell slot at the end of the day, I'm just gonna I'll cast them on as many rations as I can for people, and that way we can roll with advantage on our resource die checks. Super easy to do, super flavorful. Usually that's a cleric spell, and so the cleric's sort of like blessing their rations again, and then everybody, you know, again, spoilage and maggots and whatever sort of things, animals getting into it, whatever. We bless it, and it's more likely that that food's going to go a little bit longer, which is really fun. Thanks for joining me, guys. This is always a lot of fun, and that's going to be it for me. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you guys next time, alright? Bye.